Robin Bell is a traditional black and white printer. He's been making darkroom prints for some of the best known photographers for the past 40 years and is a man at the very top of his game. I went to spend an afternoon with him in his darkroom on the south coast of England for a good old gossip and to find out how he first got started in the industry.
I started off being a photographic assistant, and in those days most photographers in London had not only had their own studio, but they had their own darkroom as well. So part of the assisting duties was at the end of the day to process the films and even knock out a few resin coated prints for the clients to be delivered probably the next morning. I mean, it's a bit of a myth that analog is really, really slow and not customer friendly, but when the pressure's on, it could be done overnight, and it kind of it grew. That the need for rush jobs grew and grew and grew through the 80s, 70s, and 80s, to the point where labs started operating 24 hours a day. So photographers could do their shoot, come into London, deliver their bag of film, and come back the next morning and find their contact sheets or transparencies or whatever it was all ready to go the next morning. Nowadays, I gather photographers would shoot 1,000 shots on their digital camera and have to spend all night editing and retouching.
Yeah. That's the irony,
yeah. So, boo to them, I say.
So, after you got established in the industry, at some point, you probably realised, I've got a talent here that I can do this on my own.
It wasn't so much to do with finding a talent as finding that I didn't really like the front line of being a photographer. The photographers I worked for were unglamorous, workaday photographers who did anything. They could do room sets or still lives or landscapes or portraits or fashion. They're just all round good guys. So I learnt how the photography game worked at that level and decided that it wasn't really for me to be, talking to art directors and ordering models what to do. I didn't feel comfortable with that. But I did feel comfortable hiding in a dark room doing printing. And so I started looking for specialist printing jobs. The first one of any significance was a place called Panic in Newman Street, off Oxford Street in London. And all the darkrooms in those days had sort of crazy names. There was one called Tantrums, and Panic and Downtown, and anyway, they had sort of sexy names. But this Panic place had a guy called Jerry Dickens working there, who was the sort of celebrity printer of the day, although printers weren't recognised as celebrities at all in those days. But he used to print for Clive Arrowsmith and Justin de Villeneuve and Bailey and all the old names like that. And I spent 2 or 3 years as his dog's body. Yeah. He never taught me directly. He was just so busy and so impatient, and a bit of a petulant fellow. But he couldn't half print, and I just used to watch him and take note.
It rubbed off on you?
It rubbed off, yeah. It was a sort of symbiotic process. I then spent an awfully long time working for Joe Andrews, the famous Joe's Basement.
Okay, yeah.
He had a company before Joe's Basement, and I worked for him then. And he was a good old guy. He taught the work ethic, I think. He wasn't particularly skilled in this kind of printing, but he'd just do anything to get the job done as fast as possible. For him, it was mostly about speed rather than quality. It was a bit of an old sweatshop. I don't want to do him wrong or anything. But he taught me just to keep going till the job's done, no matter how big, no matter how difficult. Yeah. And we did spend 3 days and 2 nights on one job once without sleeping. Right. And he'd get hamburgers in from, what's the famous burger place that's...
McDonald's.
They're more famous than, Hard Rock right. Cafe. He was a friend of Joseph Tigrit, who owned the Hard Rock. And so he'd ship in burgers and chips and things for the slaves to eat. But the job got done against all odds. So that's armed with that work ethic and armed with... Well, I also started the black and white film developing hand printing department at Joe's.
Okay.
And he gave me an assistant to work with me. So Chris Clun, who's now a fantastic photographer, he was processing the films and doing the contacts, and I was doing the printing, and I was building up my clientele there. So I got Donovan and Clive Arrowsmith and Marcus McAdam and...
All the famous ones.
All the really, really big ones. Yeah. And eventually, in 1983, I went out on my own, and I've had my own darkroom since then.
So, talking of clients, obviously you've printed for some of the biggest names, but what would you say was the peak of the demand for this kind of printing, traditional darkroom printing?
All of the 80s, and I kind of lost track really, but it's when digital first reared its ugly head. So from the 80s, late 70s, all through the 80s, up till when digital started, which took a while to get going. But there was this sort of distant calling that was going, digital's coming.
Yeah, there's cavalry coming over the hill.
Yeah. Digital's coming. And I was going, just ignore it, everybody, it'll go away. Well, it didn't go away, but the peak was extraordinary. I had 10 people working for me at Chelsea Wharf, and clients, photographers, were walking in with carrier bags with 200 rolls of film in every other minute. It was bedlam, absolute bedlam. And I did like 40 2016s for Donovan in 2 hours on Fiberbase because he had to have them. Versace's. So it was crazy, really, really crazy. But I managed to keep a sort of handle on it and built up a reputation. And it's almost nicer now because I've got a reputation and clients come to me and I've got much more time and I can relax and I work on my own, which I'm happy with. And even moving out of London doesn't seem to have done me any harm.
Yeah. The way that you work now with all modern technology, etc., has it changed at all since the 70s and 80s when you used to, when you first get into the trade?
The way that I work, the method is the same. The urgency is somewhat diminished, and the workload is diminished, but it's all the nicer for that. I just take my time over every job that no one's in such a screaming demand now when they come to me, because they come to me for a different reason than they used to. It's because of the process that people come here now, not because they're forced to, because it's the only game in town, as it used to be in those days.
But there must be lots of chemicals and papers which you can no longer get hold of, which would have been, standard practice back then.
Well spotted, Marcus. It's a problem, but so far not insurmountable. People are kind of amenable.
So you find alternatives?
I haven't had to yet, because I've still got old papers behind me, and down here I've still got quite a few of the the old papers that
that you can't get hold of anymore.
couldn't get a new box of them.
Okay, so can you charge a premium for those because they're obviously a rarity?
I could, but I don't.
Oh, you're so kind.
Because I'm that kind of guy.
Okay. Now, I remember having a conversation with you, it would have been 2006, 2007, talking of that digital cavalry coming over the hill.
Tsunami, we call it, actually.
Yeah, well, it wasn't back then. But I remember saying to you, have you thought about trying to get a method where you project a digital image onto paper, so you've still got your hands and you can still do all your wizardry and everything, but rather than shining a light through a negative, you're just having a projector that projects exactly the same image onto paper. Have you explored that at all?
I'm not sure, but I think it exists.
Okay.
Isn't it called a lambda print?
Well, a lambda print is a digital print on light-sensitive paper, but it's done through a machine. But I'm talking about projecting an image onto paper, so that you can still use your hands and dodging and burning and do all your sort of grading and all that stuff. But the only difference is that rather than shining a light through a black and white negative, you're just projecting a digital file onto the paper. So as far as the paper's concerned, it's still receiving an image. There's no difference in that. It's just the source is different. But I don't understand why that hasn't become more of a thing, because then you're combining, don't shoot me down too much here, but you're combining the positives and the convenience of digital with the traditional printing of the darkroom. And it's using both together.
This may exist.
Okay, but you don't know about it.
I absolutely don't know. What happens now is, if you shoot a digital file that you need a silver gelatin print from, I send you to a place called Bayeux in London, as in the tapestry, and they make negatives from files.
That sounds expensive, though.
Yeah, what are you going to do, And everything's expensive, right? Yeah. If they don't have to retouch anything from your file, in other words, you send them a nice, clean, high-res file, they'll make a balanced neg, which they then post to me, I think, 70 quid, something. You can get a neg made. Yeah. The other thing you're talking about, I don't think exists, but it might do.
Okay.
I'm the last person to talk to about it.
Okay, but you get the idea. You could just have a projector up there shining down.
Yes, I've got it. You've been bleating on about this.
But that would bypass the stage of having to go to Bayeux.
I know, but I don't know. Does it exist? I haven't a clue.
Okay.
It's a good theory.
Yeah. So,
but I remember you talking about this before, so why don't you...
Shut up about it.
Yes.
Okay, so what would you say is the main difference between a darkroom print, like that you would do, and a black and white print that would come out of a machine?
Well, it's ultimately digital is by its nature superficial. It's literally on the surface, sprayed on with ink, I gather.
Yeah,
that's what they tell me.
Unless it's a lambda print, but it's still a digital file.
Yeah. And silver gelatin, and it's been going for a very long time, and collectors want it because of its depth, its richness, and its sumptuosity. Now, this is a word I've always used in.
Okay, I'd have to look that one up in the
interviews,
dictionary.
And it's got a sort of richness about it, a tactile. It's a piece of finished fine art in your hands.
Yeah.
Whereas digital is a kind of representation of the image. And I've seen beautiful digital prints.
Yeah.
Mostly colour. And I'm sure the technology has improved to make digital black and white prints. But by their own admission, they just can't get the silver gelatin thing, and why should they?
No, absolutely. And from my experience, I think that if you're going to do a colour print, there's no comparison anymore. A traditional darkroom colour print is not in the same league as what you'll get coming out of a colour lambda printer. It's still light sensitive paper, but you just don't get that sharpness and the same control. However, that's not the same with black and white, because you've touched on it there. I think that when you have a traditional hand printed black and white thing in your hands, it's a one-off. And when you've got a black and white print, you can just go, well, I'll have 5 of those, and they're all like absolutely identical. Whereas if you printed 5 prints, even though theoretically they're the same, they're not the same, because obviously you've done
How dare you?
No, but you've done them individually.
How very dare you? They'd be exactly the same. No, I do. Obviously, I get your point. They're all done as one-offs, basically.
Yeah.
Even if you're doing 5 of them. Yeah. Look, I've lived this life, and I've talked up silver gelatin in many articles and so on, and I just know that it's a better end product. That's all. In terms of it's getting less and less coverage, less and less. It's not out there as much for as many people to know about or to see. I mean, I imagine a lot of the people that look at your photography online haven't seen silver gelatin. It's possible.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
So they don't, until you see them side by side, I guess you don't really know why silver gelatin is spoken about in the way it is. But collectors don't like digital prints. They like platinum prints.
Sure.
They like salt prints. They like cyanotypes. They like silver gelatin. They don't really like digital.
But probably partly for the reason that I just explained about a digital, it's just you can press the button and it repeats, and you can do as many as you want exactly the same.
That's a kind of moral question, isn't it? It's about the quality, really, I'm talking about. And it doesn't matter how many ways you look at it, it's on the surface. It's a superficial process. And although they say it's archival, digital, crystal, paper, this or that, how do we know? You know, they said that about CDs. Sure. When they first came out. Remember those?
Yeah.
Remember DVDs? Apparently you can't play a DVD on a laptop these days.
Well, it's like all new technology. When CDs first came out, they said, "Oh, it's amazing. You can't scratch them, but you can."
They're more f***ed up than my vinyls, that's for sure.
Exactly.
And they do that annoying noise that we have discussed earlier.
Yeah, digital noise. Yeah.
The digital mess.
Yeah. So when you're printing from a client's negative, obviously the client is the photographer, but the end result, do you see it as a collaboration between the photographer and what you've done in the print?
Not so much these days, because of, I think people are coming to me to get a Robin Bell print. It sounds awfully pretentious.
But that's why
I think that's how it works now.
But that's why I'm asking the question, because if they're coming to you for a Robin Bell print, then they're wanting your input. So the end result has to have your input into it. So therefore it has to be a collaboration.
Yeah. I would say it used to be more of a collaboration, because a lot of photographers in, let's say, the 80s and 90s had darkroom experience. So they tended to think they knew as much about printing as the printer they were employing. So they felt it was more of a collaboration than it actually was. Nowadays, I think people just trust me to bring out the best possible result from their negative. And it's quite rare for someone to go, "Oh, don't like that," because who would know better than me how to do it, you know?
Yeah, sure.
It's a bit like, I don't want to come over all sort of cocky, but I've just done so many silver gelatin prints.
But that's why people come to you, because they want your input. So therefore they're less likely to go, "Well, I don't like what you've done there." So
they better not.
Yeah. Is there a particular film where when someone says, "Look, I've got some negs," and you look and see what film stock, and you're thinking, "Oh, bloody hell," or does it really not matter?
Doesn't matter at all. Every negative, whether it's really dense, really thin, really badly exposed in any way whatsoever, I don't go, "Oh, this is shot on FP4. Sure. That's going to be a problem," or whatever. It just doesn't matter at all. I just shove the neg in the enlarger and then see what the solution's going to be. So I mean, there are some tricky films that people like to experiment with. I can't even think of their names now because I've got a bad memory. But those kind of adoxy things that are supposed to cut out all the mid-tones and what have you. And
so on that subject, I've got a roll of film at home which I haven't exposed yet, and it's called Super Positive, and it's a black and white positive film.
I hate that.
See, there we go. So we found the one that you hate.
Go get it scanned.
But it's ISO 0.6.
Yes, but what's the point? As far
Because
as
it's fun.
No, it isn't. It's just mucking about. It's just. No, that was always an issue, because what are you going to do with the black and white slide? Present it as a slide, or you then have to go through two more processes to get a print done. So what's the bloody point of it? I just don't get.
Yeah, no, fair point.
Photographers used to take around portfolios of beautifully mounted transparencies, right? Especially with colour. Yeah. But even, shooting Dia Direct or whatever it was called, positive black and white film, they'd have those as a transparency. But to get a print from that, these days you just have to scan it, wouldn't you?
Sure, yeah.
I mean, unless you want to make a neg, and then it's sort of, like I say, 2 stages removed from the original. So you'd lose sharpness and integrity every stage. Okay,
so I'm by no means, I don't confess to be, and I'm not seen as a magician in Lightroom or Photoshop. However, some people assume that I can rescue a bad image. So they'll say, look, I've taken this image here. Can I pay you to see if you can make something from it? Which you never can, because if what's coming out of the camera is crap, you can't polish a turd. Do you get that same thing where people are giving you a negative that they know in their heart of hearts isn't a great shot, and they're expecting you to wave a magic wand? And
I spend my entire life polishing turds. That's the whole point of me.
Let's just hope most of your clients aren't watching.
No, well, I jest, obviously, but no, there's an awful lot of borderline impossible. But I just see that as a challenge, and ultimately, I'll get the best I can out of the neg, given the limitations of the materials. But yeah, I'm a rescue guy.
Okay.
I think that's one of my reasons for existing, is to get a decent result from a shit neg.
Yeah. When you're, talking about today, when you're printing and you're doing your dodging and burning and you're using all your tools, do you still think you're learning? So, do you know more now than you did 2 years ago, 5 years ago, or do you think you've you've reached that plateau now?
No, it's a very good question, and I'm not sure I know the answer to it. I feel like I am a master of what I do, and I approach everything with an enormous confidence. So I'll go direct to the solution as fast as I can, and it's sort of second nature now. It's like sort of a bit like asking Djokovic, do you feel like you're learning every day about your backhand and what you can do with it? And he'd probably say, yeah, sure, I train every day too. I'm probably learning every day subconsciously.
But do you ever look at a print that you did maybe 10, 15 years ago and think, if I could redo that now, I would do that differently? So you look at something, with the wisdom you have today.
Well, that's another good question, young man.
Yeah, thank you.
Is that I have moods, same as photographers have moods.
Yeah.
And I could have felt a lot differently about that negative 10 years ago than I would do now if I was presented with it fresh. So I might approach it, would definitely be on a different paper for a start, because 10 years ago that wouldn't have existed. The paper I'm using mostly is Ilford Warm Tone Glossy, for fibre, obviously, for 95% of what I do. And not tricksy anymore, like I used to be. There were a lot of across the board demands for fancy lift printing and toning and split toning and split grading, and I'm very straightforward, kind of classic, let's say classic black and white printing. So my aim really is to just get optimum, gorgeous, rich, balanced print from whatever neg that comes my way. That was my same objective 10 years ago. But I guess if you saw the two different results 10 years later, there'd be differences, nuances, mood swings.
Yeah.
So yes, I guess differences exist. I wouldn't get exactly the same print. That would be quite weird if I did.
Right, so on that subject, I have brought with me today some negs, which maybe you developed these 15 years ago, I don't know.
No, I think you'll find Genesis did.
Well, some of them, look.
Actually,
whose writing is that? Yeah.
That'll be Sally.
Yeah, okay.
Or Sally.
Yeah.
You're right, yeah. Beautiful, beautiful contact.
Right. This is a guy who used to be a taxi driver, regular taxi driver of mine in India, because I used to spend a lot of time in Delhi, and I used to love his eyes because he obviously had some thyroid problem, I think. So, but I used to sit in the back, and I used to look at him in the rearview mirror, and he looked like he was permanently about to crash because his eyes were wide open. And at first, it made me really nervous, but he was incredibly photogenic with his beard and his turban and everything. So this shot here has a kind of sentimental value for me. So it'd be really good to get one of those, your input on that. And the other one that I would really like to do is this is an infrared. Got anything against infrared film?
Nothing at all.
Okay, so this is an infrared on Konica infrared 750, which I used to shoot all the time, but is one of the many that's fallen by the wayside. You can't get it anymore. Yeah. But that just came out really well. So I'd love a print of that on 617. What's the biggest you can print here, by the way?
60 inches wide. But you ain't getting one of those.
No, I mean, what's the biggest neg you can print?
How? 10 by 8.
Okay.
Well, I could do a contact print from 1411 or...
Right, yeah. But an enlargement.
An enlargement from 10 by 8.
Okay.
I have a 10 by 8 enlarger.
Right. And there's probably not many of those existing anymore, right? They're probably a rarity.
Now, here's the thing.
Right.
There's a lovely man called John Boyce.
Okay.
Who many, many years ago, 40, 50 years ago, used to work in the De Vere factory, making De Veres.
Okay.
Or helping to make De Veres. I don't know exactly what his job was. When the digital tsunami, I don't know why you call it cavalry. Well, digital cavalry, as if it's rescuing the world from silver gelatin. Why I oughta, or why I oughta. Anyway, the tsunami, the sort of great disaster that came in digital form. All the colleges, universities, professional working darkrooms just closed. They had to close. They went, oh God, we're not going to be able to, So this guy John Boyce went around closing darkrooms down, taking away all the equipment, putting them in a warehouse somewhere, and installing, brand new shiny iMacs or whatever they are. And everyone thought, oh, that's us sorted. Oh, no, it wasn't. They're now having to go to John Boyce to say, have you got any enlargers? We wish to install a darkroom.
Yeah.
How long is this? 20 years? So everyone's come to realise the error of their ways, their foolishness, their foolhardiness. And they're having to pay him to come and install De Veres back in their darkrooms.
But that's the genius of John Boyce. He's
a clever man.
He's got rid of all this stuff and he's selling it back to them for 10 times the price he bought it.
He's not only selling it back to them, but he's getting new De Veres made in China.
Okay.
To, replica De Veres, because the demand is so high. So I've forgotten what the question was, but that's roughly speaking the answer, I think.
To see Robin at work hand printing the photo of the taxi driver, check out the July episode of Photography Online, for which there is a link in the description below. There's also a link to his website. Thanks for watching.